Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about Case of the Ransacked Lab and whether or not it's worth your hard-earned money. So it's an exclusive that Webcore sent me to try out and give my review on, and thank you for that, because this was definitely a card I saw as a possible chase card from this new set, and there's a lot going on with it. It's a support card, enchantment case. At the beginning of your turn, reduce the cost of all cards in your hand by 1. To solve, if you've cast 6 or more cards, this card gains a solved emblem. Solved, when you cast a spell, draw a card, it gains 5 mana. So in the playtesting that I've done, you don't have to cast 6 or more cards after you've played this card so that it gets solved. So that's a good thing going for it. But when you cast a spell, draw a card, it gains 5 mana. So that obviously means we're going to want a way to cast a lot of spells at a time. You're going to use this kind of as an engine to get more cards in your hand, and it should be thought of as a combo / loop enabler. But in my practice with it, it's a little bit more fiddly, I should say, than I expected. So let me show you the deck that I came up with that really, I think, has been the most success for me. So this is Nicol Bolas, Dragon God, and Captain Ripley Vance. I've been looking for, when this card was first spoiled, especially when God spoiled it, you remember his maniacal cackle when he spoiled this card for us, right? So when you cast a spell, deal 6 damage to your opponent's planeswalker. So I was going through all of my cards that have an effect when you cast spells, and I came up with Captain Ripley Vance and Judith Carnage Connoisseur. Judith is a brand new card that you can get from Battles from the Ages. It's a rare, but it creates 4 red devil tokens. Then your creatures gain death touch and lifelink until end of turn. So that triggers any time, every time you cast a spell. No cap on it, which is fantastic. Same with Ripley Vance. All of her abilities can trigger multiple times a turn without end. And then I put a bunch of cheap spells into my deck to be able to take advantage of that mana gain. So I'm trying to cast spells for free, basically, and then cut your losses obviously is a good inclusion in this deck because it just helps get everything out. And even if I'm not able to cast it just from another spell that the Case of the Ransacked Lab triggers from, it's still such a good card. And then River Tears Charm, a lot of time it's going to be able to fuel my cheap spells, so that's going to be both removal and a little bit of an engine to keep my cards going. Talent of the Telepath, fantastic card, and it also will cast for free if I pull it with Case of the Ransacked Lab. Same with Illicit Shipment, the black equivalent of Talent of the Telepath. Mishra's Command, this comes into your hand with no stored mana, but it's pretty easy to get more mana into it if you're playing this deck. So, also Days and Doing will refresh our hand and give us some more cards that will most likely be filled with mana. So it's a pretty cheap deck. Like, there's nothing in here that costs a lot. A lot of these can be cast off of one match, so that has that going for it. And so yeah, let me show you exactly how this deck works in practice. Alright, so we get Case of the Ransacked Lab right away. I don't necessarily need to get it out there first because it's not really going to be doing much for us until we've been able to cast 6 cards anyway. So putting it out there first will leave it a little vulnerable. I will save Days Undoing. Cast the case first, and then get Days Undoing out. So we can do that. River Tears Charm went off, so that's good. And I think we've solved the case at this point, so we'll see. Child of the Telepath. We'll grab Ripley Vance. I guess not yet. So, I know for sure I've cast more than 6 cards, so I'm not sure why it's not yet triggering. Got my loop going. Maybe it doesn't trigger, and yeah, I think it doesn't trigger until the case gets solved at the end of your turn. I don't know if you saw that little animation, but it was a little solved animation. So now it's solved. So I guess you can't solve it within the turn that you play it, which is a little bit disappointing. But now that it's solved, we can maybe watch it do things in action. But okay, so that's cool. Reduce the cost of all the cards in your hand by 1. So that means I'm able to cast a lot of the cards in my hand already. So get a Mishra's Command. If I grab Mishra's Command with Talent of the Telepath, then I can already just cast it. Casting it is more important than filling it with stored mana. And then Ripley Vance is going off. Have Riveteer's Charm start killing stuff. I'm more have it in my hand for the haste. That red devil token gets huge, and sometimes you just want to smack your opponent in the face with it that turn you cast it, so Mishra's Command will help with that. So we won the game here, and that was an interesting little thing we figured out about it, that it doesn't cast, or that it doesn't solve until at the end of your turn. So, is that how solve is supposed to work? Is that how it works for every card, or is it just this card that does that? To solve. Well, we'll look at the card again here. Alright, so yeah, that's as written. At the end of your turn, if the conditions to solve the cases are met, this card gains a solved emblem. Okay, so that's one thing to think about. You can cast this card and then just save the rest of your spells in your hand until the next turn that you can get the loop sort of going. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So there's a lot of little conditions that come into play when you're working with this card that don't make it so overpowered that it can take over games right away, like a wizard class or anything like a Song of Creation or whatnot will do for you. So it's not quite as broken as everybody may be expected because of all these extra conditions that need to be met first. So that is how the best deck that I created works with this card. But let's check out some other decks that I tried to build for this and show you exactly, and show you if this card is worth using in other color combinations. Okay, so here's another deck idea for you. In case of the Ransacked Lab, of course. This is Kasmina. Some of the same cards as we were using before for a lot of the same reasons. We got Talent of the Telepath, Animus Awakening. It's not a great card, but it is 5 mana to cast, so If we happen to have a lot of green gems on the board, this will give us some function right away, but it's really to just keep our engine running. Tainted Indulgence, 5 mana, draw 2 cards, discard a card, but if there are 5 or more different cards in your graveyard instead, the last card in your hand gains 6 mana, so there's a likely possibility that we're going to cast one of our other cards here, including Awaken the Woods, which this is a pretty nice little card for this deck because not only is it pretty good when you have your Dryad Forest tokens down, but these Dryad Forests are actually land tokens, so that means that our next card actually plays really well with it. So, Blossoming Tortoise, at the beginning of your turn, convert X gems to green. X is 2 times the number of land cards you control, including their reinforcements. So, it really doesn't take much to get this card's level up, and once you do, it's going to be converting. So there's a lot of synergy between Blossoming Tortoise and Awaken the Woods. If you haven't paired those two together, give it a try. But anyway, Blossoming Tortoise is just going to be good for, everything because it is good at everything. But when a land creature enters the battlefield under your control is reinforced, it gets +1/+1. So it's making these little guys a little stronger. And the nice thing about having these two cards together is that Blossoming Tortoise can take care of all the gem conversion you need. Therefore, you don't have to use the Dryad you don't have to make your Dryad tokens not attack or not block because you won't have to trigger that part because you already got the conversion taken care of with the Blossoming Tortoise. And then this little guy, Balmor Battlemage Captain, very underrated uncommon. It's a bird wizard, 5 mana, so it'll be cast pretty easily in this deck. It's only a 1/3, but when you cast a spell card, your creatures gain +2/+0 and gain trample until end of turn. And that means we should be able to be casting a decent amount of spells while we play here. So throughout the match, this card will be just pumping up our creatures a decent amount as we go. But the fact that it's so cheap makes it really interesting in that way. And then Riveteer's Charm, a lot of the reason this is in here is because to get rid of anything like a Phyrexian Vindicator, Faithbound Judge, or something that will keep us from being able to attack our opponent at will. But there's, a lot of other nice things about it. There's the 6 or more red gems, draw 3 cards. Those cards gain outcast in X mana. We want to give our cards mana. And since there's a lot of cheap cards in our deck here, hopefully we'll be able to cast a lot of them without too much trouble. But yeah, so I'll show you how this deck goes, and maybe it will inspire you to create something similar. Fun to go super turtle on them. I just want to see what happens if we just keep it going. So yeah, it's a nice little cheap deck to build. Pretty swift to get going with all the draw and fetch and all that. So it shouldn't take you too long to set it up and get going there. Now, let's go on to blue and black. Alright, for this deck, we're going with Ashiok, Nightmare Muse. A lot of the same cards that we've been using before. They're just that good of cards that they make a lot of decks work very well. A couple of new ones. Infinite Obliteration, of course, is a good card for a lot of reasons. One being it's a cheap way to discard cards from your opponent's hand. And it's likely going to trigger or get close to triggering from a lot of the other cards we got going on. Case of the Ransacked Lab, will reduce it by 1 mana cost. So if it's in your hand before you've casted it. That means you'll get to cast it the next turn. Infernal Grasp, it's cheap, destroy target creature, then you lose 6 life, but we'll gain that life back pretty soon if you have Judith making your creatures gain lifelink. So that shouldn't be too much of a problem. And then Sten, Paranoid Partisan, one of my favorite cards because of how it reduces the cost of all your cards in your hand by 3. Most of these things are already pretty cheap, so reducing them by 3 means you're probably going to be able to cast them. And then you can trigger him multiple times a turn, so there's a lot going on for that card that makes me really like it. Anything you pull with Broker's Charm or Riveteer's Charm, if you cast a Sten after that, you're probably going to cast that card. And yeah, I think everything else I've covered in the other decks so far, so let's see how it goes. There we go. Took us a bit of time, but set it up alright. Alright, well that was annoying. Cute little way to get rid of that hexproof creature. Get our life back from the lifelink. An annoying battle to face here. What's up with this deck? It's a weird one to face. I mean, I'm just glad there's not a bunch of Atraxas and everything else I'm used to seeing, but still annoying nevertheless. See, this is why I recommend having haste in this type of deck, and why I was having more success with Nicol Bolas, because I could have already been doing a lot of damage to him. Instead, I have to wait a turn before we get to hit, and then he's been throwing all these little cheap removals at me which have been gumming up my ability to win quicker here. So I think we're finally getting ourselves a foothold here. We've jammed him up enough turns now that it's getting harder and harder for him to claw back. Keep hitting him with some discard. Broker's Charm in case he gets any other thing out next turn. Good, we're almost there. Okay, looks like we did it. Alright. Wow. What a long slog of a battle. It was still kind of fun, but for video purposes, that's going to take some editing to get to a manageable level of sitting through. But okay, so the last color combination we gotta use is blue and white. So let's go ahead and show you what that looks like. Okay, so I thought that I would build for my favorite blue and white walker, Teferi Akosa of Zhalfir. aka Teferi L. Jackson. We got this one, of course, Healer of the Pride. 3 mana. Such an undercosted card for how good it is. So we're going to be creating creatures that enter the battlefield with Third Path Iconoclast. I think he's the cheapest creature in blue and white that I have that will create a token. When you cast a spell or support card, create an artifact soldier token. This effect can trigger up to 5 times per turn. Don't really need it to cast that much more often, though if you want to go with that with a more expensive option, there are some. I just wanted to keep this deck cheap. Only other thing that we're using here, Stroke of Midnight, destroy an opposing Vanguard support. If you can't destroy target creature and create a human token under your opponent's control. Cheap removal for white, and also the human will trigger Healer of the Pride too, so there's a little bit of a bonus there. And the last card here, Raphine's Guidance, only 5 mana. Target creature gets +1/+1 when a creature you control is buffed. If this card is in your graveyard, it gains 1 mana. So if you get enough of these in your graveyard, you cast, I believe, 3 or more. Every time you buff your creatures, this will gain mana, so it just creates an infinite loop of casting these cards, and you can stop the loop anytime you want. So kind of a fun little interaction there. Endless Detour to get rid of anything else, along with Broker's Charm. So very cheap deck to build, and mostly made with commons and uncommons. Well, and some rares. Mostly peasant build, except, of course, Healer of the Pride in case of the Ransacked Lab. So, show you how it goes here. Alright, case should be solved now. Just wanted to see if the icon is there. Yep. Okay. Take a Broker's Charm. It's Guidance. Alright. Cool. Healer of the Pride. We definitely want that going. Don't need our soldier anymore. Another healer. Don't need these cases. I'll keep one around just in case. Okay, now all of our healers are coming out. Where were you before? Don't need you around. So now we're really cooking with gas here. Thing is, these creatures don't get huge, but you know, if we threw in, instead of Raphine's Guidance, something like Serpentine Ambush or Relic's Roar, that could probably speed things up here for us, even if it doesn't auto cast. But you know, with Healer of the Pride going on here, we should be able to cast most things anyway. So I think we pretty much have this loop going as long as we want at this point. Thank you to Healer of the Pride for letting that happen. And yeah, as soon as we hit the next loop timer, I'll stop it here. We've won easily at this point. But yeah, so I haven't showed you any decks with tricolor walkers here, but you kind of get the idea. You can mix and match some things there. Well, I guess other than Nicol Bolas. But yeah, the point here is you can take a little bit of column A and column B to create some fun decks and just get the best of the best from each color that work well in this situation with this card. So there's a lot you can do with it. Okay, so a few little things I want to say about this card before I go. You're probably thinking, yeah, it's nice with all these little kind of almost weenie combos that I'm creating with it. But what about if I put it in my nice Galta Attracts a Tortoise deck? Will it do anything? Not really. I think it's very unnecessary in those decks because those decks don't really rely on cheap spells to keep their loop going. They're just creating green gem conversions and putting things onto the board for free. It's not really going to do a lot for you there. So if you're thinking about using this card to help facilitate that combo any further, you can pretty much forget about that. It really just depends on what type of decks you like to build. Do you like these decks that don't take a lot of mana to get going? It can be very effective in a situation like that. So there's a lot you can do with this card. It's just slightly narrow in its deck building capacity. It's nothing like a wizard class or song creation or anything like that. I guess it's a little bit more akin to song creation. It's not as explosive, but it doesn't have the downside that song does. But it's an interesting card. It's definitely not as, scary to face, I don't think, as some of the degenerate loops that we faced before in the game. So, pretty well balanced and well designed card. It's just a matter of seeing what I've done with it here, deciding whether or not it's worth adding to your collection for money. So, what do you think? What are some ways that you are looking forward to trying to break this card, or just other deck ideas that maybe I didn't think of or spotlight in this showcase here? Anyway, thanks again, Webcore, for letting me test this card. It was pretty fun. Took me a long time to really get the hang of it, but once I did, I had a pretty good time playing with it. So I look forward to sharing with you some things I've built with some of our other exclusives that they gave us. So stay tuned, make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one.